The plus-size nurse had been in the house 4 nights when she cut open the Mafia boss's pillow and found the needles. 12 of them, fine as hairs, worked into the seam where a sleeping man's head would press them down into his own scalp all night long. Their tips darkened with something that had been turning the most feared man in New York into a screaming, wasting ghost, while a dozen brilliant doctors looked in all the wrong places. Renzo Vitale had let her into that house the way you let in furniture. She was broad and quiet. She wore flat white shoes that made no sound on his marble. And when his underboss brought her up to the bedroom on the first night, the boss had looked at her once, dismissed her in a single sentence, and gone back to the business of dying. He did not know that the soft, unhurried woman taking his blood pressure had spent 10 years keeping men alive on plywood floors while the world came apart over their heads. He did not know she had walked into his house under a name that was only half hers, hunting a killer she had chased for 3 years, certain the man who had gutted her life was somewhere behind these walls. And he could not have guessed, that first cold night, that she was the only person alive who would look at his agony and see, where every specialist saw illness, the clean, unmistakable shape of a murder. His name closed rooms. That was the first thing anyone learned about Renzo Vitale, before they learned his face or his history or the number of men who worked under his hand. A trucker who lost a vital container off the docks in Elizabeth spent the rest of his life telling the story of the night the boss came to see him in person, and he told it in a whisper, and he never told the ending. 2 cousins out of Providence who thought the vital grip had gone soft after the old Don was killed came north to test it, and were photographed leaving a dinner in Renzo's honor, smiling, and were never photographed again. He had taken the family at 26, the night his father Salvador was shot 4 times getting out of a car, and he had held it for 9 years through a war and 2 federal cases, and a market that ate weaker men whole, and he had done it by being harder than the thing that was trying to kill him. He owned a stone house behind a wall on the north shore of Long Island, cold the way expensive things are cold, all pale glass and marble in rooms so large your own footsteps came back to you a half-second late. He had 9 companies that were legal and 4 that were not. He had a jaw a man could strike a match on, and dark eyes that gave nothing away, and for the better part of a decade nobody had put a hand on him without permission and lived to describe it. And then the pain came, and none of it saved him. It started small, a hot wire behind the right ear, the kind of thing a busy man ignores. Within a month it woke him gasping at 3 in the morning, with his neck locked so hard the tendons stood out like cable, and his vision breaking apart at the edges, and his scalp burning as though a coal had been pressed against it in his sleep. The best neurologist in the country flew in from Boston and ran him through a machine and found nothing. A specialist from a clinic outside Zurich studied his blood under glass and found nothing. A physician who had treated presidents looked into his eyes with a small light and said, carefully, that some pain has no cause the instruments can find. And Renzo took the man by the collar and put him against the wall and asked him whether he thought that would comfort the men circling the vital name. And the doctor left the estate within the hour and did not send a bill. Because that was the true weight of the thing, heavier than the pain. In Renzo's world, a boss who could not sleep was a boss who could not think, and a boss who could not think was a boss already in the ground. The whispers had started before he had a name for what was happening to him. Bianca Costa, the woman his father had promised him to when they were both children, the woman whose family's guns and shipping lanes would fold into the vital name the day they married, had begun watching him across the long dinner table with the flat, patient attention of someone reading a will. His own capos took longer and longer to return his calls. And through all of it, his oldest friend stayed closer than anyone. Matteo Serra had grown up 2 streets over from the Vitals, had bled beside Renzo in the war, had been made underboss the same month Renzo took the ring, and he sat up through the worst nights now with a devotion that would have moved a softer man to something like love. It was Matteo who found the private doctor. Bernard Keller, discreet and enormously expensive, a lean, fastidious man who wiped his hands on a folded white cloth after everything he touched, and who took a suite of rooms in the East Wing and installed monitors and prescribed things in small glass bottles, and after 2 weeks had made Renzo no better and the whispers no quieter. It was Keller who first said the word that curdled in Renzo's chest. Psychosomatic. And it was Mateo, gently, a warm hand on the boss's shoulder, who said that a man in his state needed eyes on him at night, someone to sit in the dark when the doctors had gone home to their families, someone to watch the vitals and be there when the fire came. A nurse. Renzo had said no. Mateo had let it sit through 3 more screaming nights and then made the arrangements anyway, and Renzo, gray-faced and hollowed out and despising himself for the weakness of it, had let him. That was how Delilah Crane came to be standing in the marble foyer of the Vital estate at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night with a canvas bag over her shoulder and rain drying in her hair. She was 32. She was a big woman, wide through the shoulders and full through the hip, soft in the way of someone who had made her peace with her own body a long time ago and did not spend much thought on it anymore. And she stood in that cold room with her weight settled even under her, taking up exactly as much space as she took up and not apologizing for a square inch of it. She had spent 4 years as a nurse in field hospitals where the floor was plywood and the wounded came in faster than the light would hold, and 6 years after that in the trauma bay of a county hospital in the Bronx where the wounded also came in faster than the light would hold. And in those 10 years she had learned that fear was a thing that happened in your chest whether you invited it or not, and that the only trick that mattered was keeping your hands working while it happened. Her hands were steady now. She let her eyes move over the enormous room without seeming to, over the man in the black suit who had opened the door, over the second man on the stairs whose jacket hung wrong on the left where something too heavy to be a wallet sat against his ribs, and she marked the exits the way she marked exits everywhere, and she waited. She was also, though no one in that house knew it yet, 3 years into a hunt that had eaten her whole life, and she had chosen this doorway on purpose. In the lining of her bag, wrapped in a sock, she carried a photograph of a young man in a borrowed suit, laughing, and a set of dog tags she had refused to bury. She had not come here to nurse a boss. She had come here because every thread she had pulled for 3 years had run, in the end, into the Vital organization, and because the last and best of those threads had told her the man she was hunting was somewhere inside these walls, close to the family, trusted, and she meant to find his face and be the last thing he ever saw. That was the truth she carried up the stairs behind Mateo Serra, and she carried it the way she carried everything, with steady hands and a still face. Mateo talked the whole way up. He was handsome in a smooth, expensive way, easy with his smile, and he used it on her now, taking her cold hand in both of his warm ones. "You must be exhausted. Terrible night to travel. He's not an easy patient, and I want you to hear that from me before you go in. Whatever he says to you tonight, it's the pain talking, not the man." "I've nursed a lot of pain," she said. "It talks, I don't take it personally." Something moved behind Mateo's eyes and was gone, a small recalibration, the look of a man who had expected a different sort of woman and was quietly adjusting his estimate of her downward. He led her along a corridor hung with paintings worth more than her whole street, and he named the doctors and the medications in their glass bottles and the schedule of the vitals, and she listened to every word while she watched the way his fingers grazed the doorframe of the last room before he opened it. A small, unconscious habit, the touch of a man who moved through this house as though it already belonged to him. The master bedroom was dark but for one lamp, and it was the size of her whole apartment, and in the center of it, propped on a mountain of pillows with a glass of something amber in his hand, sat the most dangerous man in New York, with murder in his face. Renzo Vitale looked at her a long moment. He took in the canvas bag, the flat shoes, the plain scrubs, the body under them, and his mouth curved into something that was not a smile. "This," he said to Mateo, not to her, "is the help." "Renzo, I have had the finest medical minds on 2 continents in this room." His voice came low and rough, worn thin at the edges by the nights. "Men who charge more for an hour than most people see in a year, and you have brought me a night nurse out of a city hospital." He set the glass down on the table with exaggerated care. "Did you find her where we get the cleaning staff, Mateo, or is there a separate number for this?" Delilah did not move from the doorway. She had been talked to like a piece of furniture before, by men frightened enough to need to make someone smaller than themselves, and she knew the exact shape of it, and she let it land and slide off her like the rain had. She set her bag down on the chair against the wall. "Mr. Vitale," she said, My name is Delilah. I'm going to take your blood pressure and your temperature, and then I'm going to sit in that chair and be quiet, and you won't know I'm here unless you need me. That's the entire job." She snapped on a pair of gloves. "You can insult me the whole time if it helps. For some people it helps." The room went still. Mateo's smile had frozen on his mouth. Over by the window, the second man, a heavy soldier named Gennaro, whom every man in the house called Nero, went carefully blank, the way men go blank when they are working out whether they will be asked to hurt someone. But Renzo Vitale, who had not been surprised by another living person in longer than he could remember, tilted his head a fraction and looked at her as though she had come through the wall instead of the door. "Sit down," he said at last. "Do your job." She crossed the room. She took his wrist in her hand, 2 fingers to the pulse, and she felt him tense at the contact, felt the whole arm go rigid, and she understood in that first second something none of the machines had been built to measure. This was a man who was never touched. Every hand that had come near him in years had come near him with fear or a knife or something to sell, and his body had learned to brace against contact the way a beaten dog braces against a lifted hand. She counted. His pulse ran fast and fought her the whole way. Up close, with the lamp off his face, she could see how the pain had carved him out, the gray under the tan, the burst vessels in the whites of his eyes, the bruised hollows where a man who slept should have been smooth. He was falling apart, and he was watching her with a black, wary intensity most people would have flinched from. She did not flinch. She had held the hands of men dying in the mud who looked at her with exactly that intensity, needing to know whether she was going to lie to them. "Your pulse says you haven't slept in weeks," she said, wrapping the cuff around his arm. "Not the kind that counts. Your body's running on fumes." She watched the gauge climb and fall. "When it comes tonight, the pain, try not to fight it with your whole body. I know how that sounds. But every muscle you lock is a muscle screaming to your brain that you're under attack, and your brain believes it, and it turns the volume up. Let me carry some of it. That's what I'm here for." He said nothing, but under her hand the arm eased, 1 degree, and stayed eased. Mateo watched all of it from the foot of the bed with his warm smile back where it belonged, and when she had finished and written her numbers down and gone to the chair by the wall as she had promised, he came and stood over Renz and settled the pillows behind his head with the tender competence of long practice, plumping them, turning them, sliding a fresh one from the stack into the exact place where the boss's head would fall. "There," he said. "Comfortable. Nero's on the door. I'm right down the hall." He touched Renzo's shoulder. "We're going to get you through this, brother." Then he left, and Nero took his post outside, and the lamp went out, and Delilah Crane sat in the dark in a Mafia boss's bedroom and listened to him breathe, and somewhere in the small hours the breathing changed, caught, shortened, and she was on her feet and moving before the first sound tore out of him. It came out of him like something being killed. His body arched off the bed, his hands clawing at the sheets, at his own scalp, a low animal sound climbing into a strangled roar, and every lesson 10 years had beaten into her went straight to her hands. She did not grab him. She did not hold him down. She laid one broad, warm palm flat against his sternum, firm and anchor, and she put her mouth to his ear and she talked, low and level and completely unafraid, the way she had talked to boys with their legs gone under the sound of shells. "I've got you. I'm right here. It's real and it's here and it's going to crest and then it's going to fall and I'll be here the whole way down and you are not alone in this room. Push the breath out, long and slow. There, again." Nero came through the door with his gun half drawn and she said, without turning her head, in a voice like a dropped weight, "Put that away and get out." And to his own visible astonishment, he did. It took 11 minutes. She stayed through every one of them, her hand on his chest, her voice in his ear, and when it finally broke and drained out of him and left him soaked and shaking and hollow against the pillows, she was still there, and he turned his ruined face toward her in the dark and looked at her the way a man looks at land after a long time at sea. "They just watch," he said. His voice was gravel. "The doctors, they stand at the wall and they watch and they write it down." "I'm not a doctor," she said. "I'm a nurse. We don't stand at the wall." She wet a cloth at the bathroom tap and came back and wiped the sweat from his throat, unhurried, and he let her, this man who let no one because there was nothing left in him to stop her with. "Sleep now if it'll come. I'll be in the chair." He slept. It was the first true sleep he had had in weeks, and he had it because she was in the room. And when he woke to gray light coming off the water, she was still there, awake. A small line between her brows that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the shape of the thing she had begun, over the long night, to see. Because Delilah Crane had spent 10 years learning to read bodies the way other people read faces, and this body was not telling the story she had been handed at the door. The pain came at night. Only at night, and only after he had been lying down for hours, and it centered every single time on the same small territory, the right side of his head, the scalp, the neck, the skin that pressed the pillow. The specialists had all looked inside him, at his blood and his brain and his nerves, because inside is where sickness lives. But this did not move like sickness. Sickness spreads. Sickness has a logic of growth. This had the terrible flat regularity of a schedule. And over the next 2 nights, sitting in the dark, she watched how carefully the pillows were tended, how Matteo came without fail at whatever hour to arrange them himself, how he would not let old Ottavia, the housekeeper, so much as touch them, how there was always a fresh one waiting in the exact place the boss's head would land. On the 3rd night, she went hunting through the house, and it had nothing to do with the pillows. She waited until it slept, and she moved through the dark corridors on her silent, flat shoes, cataloging the family the way she had cataloged families for 3 years, learning faces and rooms and habits, looking for the shape of a killer. It was chance that put her at a tall gallery window at 2 in the morning. Below, on the black lawn, a car sat with its lights off, and Matteo Serra crossed the grass to it in his shirt sleeves, and a man got out to meet him. And even from that height, she read the exchange for what it was, the quick handoff, the low, fast words, the glance back at the sleeping house. She knew a Marchetti soldier when she saw one, because she had spent 3 years learning who was who in this world, and she stood very still and watched Renzo Vitale's most trusted man sell something to Renzo Vitale's oldest enemy under Renzo Vitale's own windows, and she filed it away with everything else. One more fact, its full weight still hidden from her. She did not yet know what she was looking at. She only knew that the man who plumped the boss's pillows with such love had another face, and that he showed it in the dark. She went back up, and on the 4th night, when the pain had come and gone and Renzo lay drained and unconscious, she did the thing she could never afterward fully explain. She took the spare pillow from the far side of the enormous bed, the twin of the one under his head, and she carried it into the marble bathroom and shut the door and turned on the light. She ran her hands over it, slow, the whole surface, pressing, feeling. Nothing. She turned it. And along the top seam, where the piping ran, her fingertips found the hardness, the resistance where the down should have given. She held the pillow up to the light and saw that the seam had been opened and stitched shut again, the work slightly too neat, slightly too new, the hand of a surgeon and not a seamstress. She took the small scissors from her bag. Her hands were steady. She cut the seam, and she found the needles. She sat down on the cold marble floor with the opened pillow in her lap, and the needles catching the light, 12 of them, more, angled so a heavy head turning in sleep would drive the scalp onto them again and again through the thin cotton. 100 small punctures a night over the great nerve that ran up the side of the skull, too small to bleed, too small to see. And when she tilted the pillow, the tips showed dark, coated with something that had turned the punctures to fire and crept into a strong man's blood a pinprick at a time for weeks, while a dozen brilliant men studied all the wrong country. She had seen those dark tips before. She had watched the wasting they caused. She had knelt at a bedside once and watched it kill a strong young man over months, gray ruin coming up through him, while the doctors said his blood showed nothing, said perhaps it was in his head, said some pain has no cause the instruments can find. She had buried that young man on a cold morning 3 years ago with a folded flag she refused to take, and his name was Elias, and he was her brother, and she had spent every day since walking toward this exact floor without knowing it. She understood, sitting there, that the killer she had hunted for 3 years and the killer who had put the boss in this bed were the same man, and that she had watched him cross the lawn 2 nights ago in his shirt sleeves, and that she had helped Renzo Vitale plump the pillows over his own murder. She wrapped the needles and the cut pillow in a clean towel and hid them in the lining of her bag beside the photograph, because they were proof, and proof was the only weapon she owned that Matteo did not. And she did not sleep at all. Renzo woke to gray light and knew at once that something in the room had changed. He was a man who had lived 9 years by reading what people did not say. "What happened?" he said. She had rehearsed 20 ways to tell him and thrown them all out. In the end, she crossed to the bed and sat on the edge of it, close enough that he tensed, and she turned his right hand over in hers and pressed her thumb gently into the tender skin behind his ear and watched him flinch. "You're not sick, Mr. Vitale. You never were. Someone has been putting needles in your pillow, in the one place a dozen doctors would never look, because doctors look inside people, and this was never inside you. It has been under your head every night." She held his eyes. "The tips are coated. That's why it burns. That's why you're wasting. And whoever did it is someone who's allowed in this room at night, someone who tends your bed, someone you trust enough to stand over you while you sleep. Sit with that before you say a name out loud, because the second you say it, your whole life changes." He did not move. She watched the information go into him and land, watched the gray face harden into something cold and final, and she braced for disbelief, for the rage of a man who would refuse to hear that the brother of his soul had been killing him by inches. "Show me," he said. She unwrapped the towel on the white sheet between them, the cut pillow, the dark-tipped needles laid out in a line, and Renzo Vitale looked down at the mechanism of his own murder, and when he reached out and touched one with the tip of his finger, his hand was steady, and his voice, when it finally came, was so quiet and so level it was worse than any scream. "He turns the pillows. Every night. He won't let anyone else near them." He closed his hand slowly around a needle until a bead of red stood up on his own palm. "I begged him not to bring a nurse. He brought you anyway. He wanted eyes on me at night." A sound came out of him that was almost a laugh and had nothing in it that laughed. "I thought it was love." "Then he made his one mistake," she said. "He brought me." He looked up at her, and under the cold there was something raw. The face of a man learning that the last person on earth he trusted had been slowly killing him, and finding, in the same breath, that a stranger had stayed up 4 nights to keep him breathing. And she thought she had passed through the worst of it. She had not. The worst of it came the next day, and it came because Matteo Serra was not a fool, and because a cornered killer does not confess, he redirects. He came for her in the long gallery when Renzo was locked in a meeting he could not skip, appearing at her shoulder with his warm smile and a hand on her elbow, steering her gently to the tall windows. "I've been trying to work you out," he said, easy, looking at the lawn. "You're very good at your job. He sleeps now. He's stronger. Everyone can see it, and it's remarkable considering the doctors could do nothing. Which makes me wonder what a woman like you finds, that the doctors miss." He turned and looked at her, and the smile stayed on his mouth and left his eyes entirely. "You strike me as someone who finds things, Delilah Crane, or should I say who's spent 3 years looking for one particular thing." The floor of her stomach dropped away. He knew her name, her whole name. He had vetted the nurse he brought into the house, of course he had, and somewhere in that vetting he had found a brother, a soldier, dead of a mystery, and a sister who never stopped asking questions, and he had put it together, and now he was going to use it, and she understood in one cold flash exactly how. He would not tell Renzo about the needles. He would tell Renzo about her. He would take the one person who had found the truth and paint her as an infiltrator with a grudge against the Vitale name, and a boss half out of his mind with pain and betrayal would have every reason in the world to believe him, and she would be gone by morning, and Matteo would go back to turning the pillows. "I find that pain has a cause," she said, holding steady while the fear ran through her chest. "Even when the machines can't see it. I've said that since the first night." "So you have." He straightened his cuff. "I'm sure the boss will want to hear all about you, everything you found." He smiled at her, all the way to his teeth this time, and walked away down the gallery, and Delilah stood at the window and knew she had until nightfall. She did not have until nightfall. She had until that evening, when Nero came for her, not the doctor's kit but her whole self, a hand closing on her arm, and walked her not to the bedroom but to the study, and put her through the door and shut it behind her, and Renzo Vitale was standing at the black window with his back to her and a gun on the desk between them, and he did not turn around. "Delilah Crane," he said, and her full name in his mouth was a stone dropped in a well. "Army, Bronx trauma. A brother Elias killed 3 years ago of an illness no one could name. A sister who filed complaints, who called reporters, who paid people, who spent 3 years chasing his ghost through my world." Now he turned, and the black, wary intensity she had met on the first night had gone somewhere colder, somewhere that had put men in the ground. You came into my house under half a name, hunting my family. In my world, I know exactly one answer to that, and it is not a conversation. He came around the desk, slow, and his hand came up and settled at the side of her throat, not squeezing, just there, warm and terrible, a promise the size of his whole reputation. Give me one reason. Tonight, before I decide the sick man was wrong to trust the woman who came here to bury him. And Delilah Crane, who did not stand at the wall, who had never once let the fear in her chest reach her hands, looked up into the ruined, dangerous face of the man she had somehow started to love and did not beg and did not lie. My brother, she said, and her voice cracked and she let it, died the exact way you're dying. Coded. Wasting. No cause the doctors could find. I knelt at his bed the way I knelt at yours, and 3 years of pulling threads all ran into your family. And the last thread told me the man who did it was inside your walls, close to you, trusted. So yes, I came here to find him, and I found him. She held his eyes with his hand on her throat. It's the same man, Renzo, the same needles, the same coding. The man killing you killed my brother. I didn't know it until I cut open that pillow and saw a thing I'd only seen once before in my life, over the bed of the only person I had left. Her breath went ragged and she kept talking through it. Kill me if you have to. But do it knowing you're killing the only person in this house who wants you to keep breathing more than she wants anything you can give her. And do it knowing the man who turns your pillows is going to stand at your funeral and cry. His hand did not move. For a long time, neither of them breathed. She watched it happen behind his eyes, the boss and the man, the world he lived in and the thing she had just put in front of him, and she did not know which one would win, and that not knowing was its own kind of dying. His thumb moved once against the pulse in her throat, feeling it hammer, feeling how steady she kept the rest of herself around it. And he did not decide to trust her. He was not a man who could do that in an evening. What he decided was smaller and darker, and it kept her alive. His hand fell away. You don't leave the estate, he said. You don't use a phone I haven't seen. Nero is on you when you're not in that room. If one word of any of this reaches Matteo, I will know it came from you, and there will be no second conversation. He picked the gun up off the desk and slid it away inside his jacket, and the ordinary violence of the movement was worse than anything he had said. You want the man who killed your brother, so do I now. We want the same corpse. That's the only ground we stand on, and God help you if you step off it. He looked at her one more moment, and something flickered under the cold, gone before she could hold it. Do your job. So she stayed, a prisoner in a stone house on the water, watched by a man with a gun on her every hour she was not in the boss's room, sharing a secret with a man who could still change his mind and end her, and it should have made the fear worse. And instead something in the danger burned the last of the pretense off the two of them. And in the days that followed she fell the rest of the way, and so did he, and neither of them could have stopped it if they had wanted to. It came out at night, the way everything true in that house came out at night. She was changing his dressing where the needles had left a spreading rawness behind his ear, her fingers careful in his hair, and he sat still under her hands and said out of nothing, Tell me about him, Elias. She did not answer at first. He waited. You've had your hands in my worst nights for a week, he said. I know how you sound when you're carrying someone through the fire. I want to know who taught you. So she told him, and not as a report. She told him about a boy 6 years younger than her who followed her everywhere, who joined up because she had, who wrote her letters in handwriting like a falling down fence, who thought the family that recruited him into this world was going to be his fortune and got a slow death for a going-away gift. She told him she had not cried at the grave because she had been too busy already deciding to find the man who dug it. And Renzo listened with a stillness she had only ever seen in him under her hand in the dark, and when she finished he said, Dante wanted to be a chef, and it was the first time she had heard the name, and he gave it to her the way she had given him Elias, one wound laid down beside another. He told her about a softer brother made a soldier by a father who did not believe in softness, dead at 24 because of it. He told her he had not been touched by a hand that wanted nothing from him since he was a boy, and he did not say it to move her. He said it flat, a fact about himself, and it moved her more than any softness could have. Her hand had gone still in his hair. His had come up and covered it and held it against the side of his own head, and neither of them spoke, and the not speaking said everything, and she understood that the most dangerous man in New York was letting her feel his pulse under her palm on purpose, offering it, the one thing he had never given anyone, and she stood there and held the thing he was too proud to name and did not let go. There were more nights like it. There was the night the storm came in off the sound and the power stuttered, and she lit a candle from the drawer, and in the moving light he looked at the whole broad, warm shape of her sitting in the dark, keeping the enemy from his door, and said, "Everyone who has ever come close to me wanted the thing I could give them. The name, the protection, the reach. You're the only one who ever wanted me to just keep breathing." He reached out in the candlelight and set his hand against the side of her face, and it was not steady, and his thumb moved once along her cheekbone, a man learning at 35 how to touch something he did not want to break. "I told you I know one answer to what you did. I've been sitting here for a week failing to give it. You want to know why?" She did not trust her voice. He said it for both of them. "Because you're the only thing in this house I don't have to be the boss in front of. And I would rather die of Mateo's needles than lose the one room in the world where I get to be a man instead of a legend." The candle burned. Neither of them closed the last of the distance, because he was still promised to Bianca Costa for the good of two families, and she was still a prisoner in his house, and the world outside that room would kill her for what she was, and the not crossing of it was harder than any crossing could have been, and that too was its own intimacy, and it was almost past bearing. The complications came fast. Bianca Costa arrived for the wedding planning, because the alliance was a fortnight out, and her family's patience had a floor, and she was slim and immaculate and cold as the house itself, and she took one look at the night nurse and read, with the swift accuracy of a woman raised in a world where reading people is survival, that something in Renzo had changed, and that she did not like it. "The help is getting familiar," she said at dinner in front of Delilah, in the tone one uses about a dog on the furniture. And Renzo, who a fortnight ago would have said nothing, set down his fork and said, "The help found what 4 of your father's doctors could not." And Bianca went still, and her eyes moved to Delilah with a new calculating attention. Later, alone with her in the corridor, Bianca stopped her, and her voice dropped all the way to steel. "I don't know what you are, but I know what he was before you, and I know what my family needs, and I will not lose a marriage that took 20 years to build over a nurse. Whatever's happening in that room ends before the wedding, or I will make it end." And Delilah, watching her face, understood two things at once. Bianca Costa was ruthless and afraid and would move against her the first chance she got, and Bianca Costa knew nothing about the needles. Whatever she was not this, and it was the first suspect Delilah could cross off with certainty, and it left the field colder and narrower and pointed straight back at the man who plumped the pillows. And there was Keller. Delilah had never trusted the fastidious doctor with his folded white cloth, and one afternoon, sent to his suite for supplies, she found him with the glass bottles out and a syringe in his hand, and a small bound book open on the desk that he closed too fast. He wiped his hands on the cloth and smiled at her with no warmth in it at all. "You've made yourself very important around here," he said. "The miracle nurse. I'd be careful, if I were you, how important I got. Important people in this house have a way of becoming inconvenient." She looked at the bottles, and at his hands, and at the book he had closed, and she said, "Quiet. How much is he paying you to keep looking in the wrong place?" And Keller's smile did not move, but his hand did, the folded cloth going still, and in that stillness she had her answer, and she knew that Keller was Mateo's, had always been Mateo's, that the 2 months of brilliant failed doctoring had never been failure, it had been service. She backed out of the suite with her supplies, and did not turn her back on him until the door was between them. That night she told Renzo everything she had, all of it laid out at last, the lawn and the Marchetti car, the coding she knew from Elias, Keller, and the book he closed too fast, Bianca crossed off, and Renzo listened to it in the dark with his jaw set, and when she finished he said, "He'll move now, Mateo. He knows you've turned into a problem he can't flatter or frighten. He won't wait for the pillows anymore. He'll find something faster and cleaner, and Keller will sign whatever needs signing." And Delilah, who had learned in 10 years to see the shape of a thing coming before it arrived, said, "Then we let him think it worked, and we be ready." She was already ready. She had been ready for days. She had stocked the emergency kit her first week over Keller's objections, and she had made sure the one drug in that room that could pull a man back across the line, a narcotic pushed him over, was in it, and she kept the needle evidence hidden. and she kept a small recorder she had bought before she ever came to this house sewn into the lining of her bag with her brother's photograph. Because a woman who has hunted a killer for 3 years does not walk into his house without a way to catch him talking. She did not tell Renzo all of that. She told him to keep performing the sick man one more day and to trust her when it came, and he looked at her a long moment in the dark and said, "I'm trusting you with the last thing I've got." And she said, "I know." And it was the truest exchange of both their lives. It came the next night, and it came exactly as she had said. The pain that took Renzo that night was not performed, and it was not the needles. She knew it the instant it started, knew it in the pitch of it and the way his body moved, and she was at his side before she understood, and then she understood, and cold went through her scalp to her heels. He was not burning. He was going slack. His pupils blown, his breath going shallow and slow, his skin the color of the sheet, and this was an overdose. A real one. The small glass bottles turned into a weapon, and she understood in one flat second that Matteo had stopped waiting and meant to end it tonight and let his private physician sign the certificate. A heart that finally gave out under the long strain of illness, natural, quiet, no war, no blood, no questions. And she understood that she was alone in a locked wing of a house full of men who answered to the man killing him, with a phone that would not reach an ambulance in time even if she were allowed to use it, and that no one was coming. No one was coming. There was only her, and she had known there would only be her, and she had made herself ready. She hit the small recorder in her bag with the flat of her hand as she moved. She rolled him onto his side and cleared his airway with 2 fingers. She had the kit open before her knee touched the floor, and her hands were absolutely steady as she drew up the reversal agent, the one drug in that room that could drag a man back from where the narcotic had shoved him. And she found the vein in the crook of his elbow on the first try in the near dark and pushed it. And then she put her whole broad body over his and breathed for him, mouth to mouth, counting, her laced hands over his sternum. Willing the drug up his arm and into the part of his brain that had forgotten how to work the lungs. "You come back," she said between breaths, and it was not calm now. It came apart, it broke into pieces. "You don't, you are not. I will not put another. Breathe. Breathe, Renzo. I did not do all of this to. Come back to me, please, please." He breathed. He dragged a breath in, huge and ragged, and his eyes came open, rolling, unfocused, found her face above his and held. His hand came up and gripped her arm hard enough to bruise, and the door opened. Matteo Serra stood in it with Keller behind him and Nero behind them both, and the 3 of them looked at the scene on the bed, at the boss who should have been dead and was breathing, at the nurse over him with the empty syringe on the sheet, and Matteo's face did the last thing his face would ever do in front of Delilah Crane. It dropped the smile entirely. The whole warm, easy mask came off at once, and under it was a flat, cold machine of a face, nothing anyone could love, nothing anyone could reach, the face that had ordered a young soldier's slow death 3 years ago the way a man cancels a reservation. "Well," Matteo said, "that's a problem." He did not raise his voice. "Both of them, Nero, make it the nurse. Desperate woman, failed medicine, she killed him and then herself. It writes itself." And Nero drew his gun. And Delilah rose off the bed and stepped between the gun and the man in it, and this was the moment 3 years had been walking her toward, and there was no plan in her pocket now and no weapon in her hand, only everything she was, and she did not think she moved, because she had never once stood at the wall. But she did not move at Nero. She moved at the truth, because the truth was the only weapon in the room that Matteo could not outshoot, and she had spent a week loading it. "He's alive," she said, loud, fast, ragged, and she flung her arm at the bed. "Look at him. Look. Your whole plan needed him dead and quiet, and he is neither. And there is a recording in this room of you ordering it 30 seconds ago, and there is a pillow in my bag with your needles in it. And every soldier in this house is about to walk through that door and find the boss you swore to breathing, and the man who poisoned him standing over the body with the gun." She was shaking, and she let all of it show. "You need him dead to be the boss, Matteo. He is not dead. I made sure of it. So what exactly are you now?" Because that was the hinge, and she had built it herself with her own 2 hands over a week of clean, sober terror, and it turned on nothing but her. A boss who dies of illness leaves a smooth handover. A boss who is found alive with a poisoner over him leaves a war and a corpse, and the corpse is the poisoner's. She had kept Renzo Vitale breathing 3 separate times, and the last time she had done it 11 minutes before the men arrived. And now the living, breathing boss was the single fact in that room that Matteo Serra could not survive, and she had made that fact with her hands, and everyone in the doorway could see it. Nero's gun did not move at first. Then it wavered, because a made man does an old sum in a moment like that, the oldest sum in that world, which is not about loyalty and never has been. It is about which man will be standing when the smoke clears, and the answer was propped on the pillows behind her, alive, because of her. Matteo saw the sum finish behind Nero's eyes, and he moved, faster than a smiling man should be able to, going for something under his own jacket, and it was Delilah, closest to him, empty-handed, who did not stand at the wall. She seized the heavy crystal lamp off the table by its base and brought it around in a full-bodied arc with every ounce of her weight behind it, and struck him across the temple with a sound like a dropped melon. He went down hard and did not get up smiling. The gun he had been reaching for skittered across the marble. Keller made a small sound and bolted and ran straight into 2 Vitale soldiers coming the other way, roused at last by the noise, men who took one look at their boss upright and breathing and understood in an instant which way the wind had turned in that house. It was over in less than a minute. It was over because a nurse anticipated a murder and prepared for it, and kept the victim breathing and caught the killer talking, and then dropped him with a lamp. And none of it, not 1 second of it, was a rescue. Delilah Crane had walked into that room to save the boss's life for the 3rd time in a week, and she had done it, all of it, with her own 2 hands, and the men who had killed for a living stood in the doorway and watched a heavy-set night nurse do the thing their guns had not. They took Matteo away. She did not ask where and was never told, and she understood without being told that what happened next to the man who killed Elias and nearly killed Renzo would happen in the dark according to laws that were not hers. And she found, standing over the place where he had fallen with her hands, finally beginning to shake now that the work was done, that she did not need to watch. She had come for revenge for 3 years. She had thought it would feel like something. What she felt, in the end, was the enormous, emptied quiet of a thing set down at last, and under it, new and terrifying, the fact of the man breathing on the bed above her. The days after did not settle cleanly, and she was glad of it, because clean would have been a lie. Keller was found with his glass bottles and his little book and was not seen again in any hospital in the state. Bianca Costa learned within the hour that the underboss had tried to murder the man she was to marry, and she left the estate that night, and the alliance folded with a single call between families, and there were consequences to that, weeks of them. Meetings and men and threats over territory that had been promised on a marriage that would not happen now, and they were Renzo's to carry, and he carried them. Nero, who had done his old sum correctly at the last possible second, kept his post and his life and never spoke of the moment his gun had wavered. And old Ottavia, the housekeeper, who months ago had found a strange needle caught in the boss's linen and hidden it in a drawer in pure terror, because she had not known a single soul in that house she could trust, heard at last that the boss was well and the traitor gone, and she came and found Delilah in the kitchen with flour on her hands, and took the nurse's broad face in her 2 old ones, and wept, and said the needle had been eating at her conscience for months. And Delilah held her while she cried, and did not tell her it would have changed nothing, because sometimes the kind thing and the true thing are not the same thing. And through all of it, the underworld did the one thing Renzo had feared most, and it did not break him, it remade him. The story of how the Vitale boss had been poisoned from inside his own house by his own second for 2 months, and had walked out the far side of it moved through that world like weather. He was no longer a boss who could be killed. He was a boss who had been fed to the needles by the brother of his soul and had survived it, and that was a stranger and more frightening legend than the one before, and it bought him 10 years of peace at a stroke, and men said his name lower than they ever had. But all of that was daylight. It was the 3rd night after that mattered, when the house had gone quiet and the soldiers were posted and the 2 of them were finally alone, and Renzo Vitale got out of the bed he had almost died in, on legs that barely held him, and crossed the room to where she stood at the window with the first light coming gray off the water. He stood in front of her, closer than a man who had held a gun on her a week ago, and a nurse who had lied her way through his door had any right to stand. And for a long moment, neither of them said a word. "You held a gun on me," she said finally, and her voice would not come level. "You put your hand on my throat." "I know what I did." His own voice was rough and low. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't. You walked into my house to bury me, and I'm a man who buries people for less. That's what I am. I'm not going to be soft about what I am, not even for you, especially not for you." His hand came up and set against the side of her face, and it was not steady, and his thumb moved once along her cheekbone. "But you put your body between me and a bullet 3 times in a week. You spent the worst thing that ever happened to you, the man who took your brother, and when you found him you didn't take the revenge you'd bled 3 years for. You took my pillow away and kept me breathing. Nobody in my whole life has ever wanted me alive for its own sake. Not one person. And I have spent the last week discovering that I would rather be a bad man who gets to keep you than a dead one who dies alone with a clean conscience." His voice went to gravel and dropped away. "So don't ask me to be gentle about it. Ask me for something I can actually give." "Renzo." "Say the thing you wouldn't say," he said. "In the candlelight, you wouldn't cross the room. Say why." And Delilah Crane, who did not stand at the wall, who had never once let the fear in her chest reach her hands, looked up into the ruined, dangerous, beautiful face of the most dangerous man in New York and said the thing she was most afraid of, and it did not come out clean. It came apart in her mouth. "Because I can't. I can't get in the car. I tell myself every night, tonight I go, and I don't go, I stay. I keep staying. And it's not the job, it stopped being the job a week ago. It's you. I came here to end a vital and I can't. I can't leave. The thought of the car feels like. It feels like the flag, like burying somebody. I won't do it again. I won't. I don't want to be anywhere you aren't, and I've been calling it 100 other things so I could keep my hands working, and I'm done. I'm done calling it something else." He kissed her. He kissed her the way a man drinks the first water after a long time in a dry place. One hand fisted in her hair, and the other flat and spread against the small of her back, pulling the whole warm, solid weight of her against him. And she felt him shaking, and she wrapped her arms around him and held him up, held him the way she had held him through every fire. And the sun came up off the water and filled the cold glass room with something almost warm. And for the first time in either of their whole guarded lives, neither one of them was performing a single thing for anyone. They stood like that a long time. When they finally broke apart, her forehead dropped to his jaw and his arms stayed around her, and she could feel his heartbeat where her cheek pressed his chest, fast and furious and alive in hers. And she thought of the plywood floors and the trauma bay and the flag she refused. And she thought of Elia's. And for the first time in 3 years, the thought of her brother came without the taste of copper, came as grief, clean grief, the honest kind, and she let it come. Standing in the arms of the dangerous man whose survival she had chosen over her own revenge, and she did not try to make it mean anything. She just let it be true. He would wake beside her for a very long time after that. And every single morning, before his eyes were fully open, before the boss came back up through the man to run the cold empire that feared his name, Renzo Vitale reached across the pillow, the ordinary soft pillow she had picked out herself and checked with her own hands, and would go on checking every night for the rest of both their lives. And he pressed his palm flat to the warm, broad shape of her sleeping there, and he held it there in the gray light until he felt her breathe. And only then did he let himself believe the day. What a story. From the most feared man in New York wasting away in his own bed with a dozen brilliant doctors looking everywhere but the one place that mattered, to a plus-size nurse the whole house wrote off as the help, who cut open a pillow and found the murder no one else could see, and turned out to be the one person alive hunting the same killer. Delilah walked into that house carrying the worst thing that ever happened to her, and when she finally found the man who did it, she chose to save a life instead of take one. And Renzo learned the hardest lesson a powerful man can learn, that the most dangerous person in any room is not the one with the gun. It's the one who wants you breathing for no reason at all. If this one kept you up, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps the channel more than you'd think. Subscribe and ring the bell so the next story finds you. And tell me down in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight? And be honest, did you trust Mateo? Or did you feel it coming from the very first pillow? I read every single one.